So this is episode 2 of It Had to Be Me. And today I'm really honored to have our guest, Caleb Altmeyer, on the podcast. He's a good friend of mine. And for those of you tuning in for the first time, It Had to Be Me is a podcast about, illuminating these pivotal moments in our lives that have changed the trajectory of our human experience forever. And Caleb's story is an incredible one because he's doing something far greater than himself. And he'll expand on that here in a second. But I wanted to bring up a quote that I read the other day, and it says, attempt something so big that you will surely fail unless God or divine forces intervene. And like when I think of that quote, I think of you, and you were one of the first people that I wanted to bring on this podcast because of your story and your mission. And by no means are we a religious podcast, but I'm finding that these people with these insane missions in life, like God is at the root of it, right? And for me, God didn't show up in the same way that he showed up for you. Sure. Like I remember the day that I accepted God into my life, I was at my rock bottom. I had stopped dreaming and I just asked God for a favor. I said, God, like I need a favor because I had nothing else to fall back on. And for you, you had a very different experience, but it's funny. I like to share stories of how I got to know my guest, and Caleb and I became friends through a couple coaching groups. And I remember we were sitting down one day, going through some of the materials for the Ben Newman coaching group. And for those of you who didn't listen to episode 1, I had Christine, another member of that group, on, and we talked about a part of his framework called the burn. And your burn is what you tap into that kind of fuels your why and your purpose. And Caleb and I were like, this is the easy one, right? It's so hard for people to find a burn to anchor to, because maybe they don't have that scar tissue, and it doesn't have to be a fiery thing, but for us it is. And like, I remember us going tit for tat, talking about all the mess ups in life, and like, there was no judgment. We were actually like cracking each other up. Right.
Yeah.
And so when you got into your story, I couldn't believe it because you had shared with me just kind of where you started as a kid. And you're going to get into that obviously, but I was like, wow, talk about somebody that has completely done a 180 in their life. And I also hadn't known that you had been doing this for over a decade. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So without further ado, go ahead, introduce yourself, tell everybody about helping captives, and then we'll get into your story.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
So my name is Caleb Altmeyer. I'm the founder of Helping Captives. And I'm founder of Bikers Helping Captives and the Caleb Altmeyer Ministries. But Helping Captives is basically an anti-trafficking organization that's in the Pacific Northwest, specifically in Spokane, northern Idaho. And we provide really just opportunities for freedom and safety to those exploited by trafficking. And we do that through prevention, intervention, and recovery services. And so, if somebody gets rescued and they come out of the life, they might be on drugs, they might be coming out of a really rough situation, and they need a place to go. And that's what we do, is we actually provide safety and food and counseling and trauma care, and try and help them get stable and try and help them get off drugs and help them get clean, and then try and get them into long-term care programs.
And you guys, from what I understand, you really have that whole continuum covered where you've got the emergency services, right?
Yeah.
And then you reintegrate them back into society as well. And you have this ongoing support, which makes you guys very different from other sex trafficking organizations out there. Is that correct?
Yeah. So it's weird because we would love to be able to have every single continuum care, and we know exactly how to do that. And the reason is because when we started, we actually started with just an emergency house and had no idea what we were doing. Like, we just opened it up. We had heard that trafficking had been going on in our community. I had some really close friends of mine tell me their story. They had been trafficked. And we opened up the house thinking we'd help like 2 to 3 women, and we had 21 women go through the house in 9 months. And so we were just kind of caught off guard by just the crazy amount of people that are coming out of drug addiction and trafficking in our area. And so then we kind of pivoted and started meeting with people and realizing, hey, back then in 2017-ish is when we started doing the anti-trafficking thing. And the organization's been around for like 13 years, but the anti-trafficking stuff we started in like 2017. And so we ended up actually going and traveling and meet with a bunch of organizations. And what we were finding was people were getting rescued back then, but they had nowhere to go and they didn't have any long-term solutions. So we actually ended up launching a long-term 9 to 18 month program that actually included total rehabilitation and then going into transitional living and transitional housing. So
Yeah.
that's what we did for a long time. And then what we found is like there's more organizations that have planted those long-term care programs, but there's very few emergency care. So what happens is there's a big gap between when somebody gets rescued out of sex trafficking and when they're ready to actually go into a long-term care program like we had. So we had lots of women that would actually come to our program and they just getting off meth, just getting off fentanyl. They're not ready to go into a long-term care program, but there wasn't an alternative.
Right.
So we kind of decided we were going to fill that gap and we were going to do emergency stabilization. And so we actually get them right when they come off drugs, right when they're coming out of the life. And because we did the long-term program for so long, we're connected with a lot of great long-term care programs in the United States. And so we'll actually sometimes have those programs. If the women aren't ready, they'll send them to us. We'll help them get stable and then we'll send them back. And then other times we'll get them right off the street, get them stable, and then get them to those long-term programs.
Wow. Yeah. So we're going to get into this, but I think we got to go back because I'm sure there's a lot of questions from the audience of like, okay, how did you get into all this stuff? Like who stumbles upon this? Who sees these gaps? Like, how did you get here? So I know your story, but the audience doesn't, obviously. So I think one of the most fascinating parts of it is where you started, like in high school. You were a troubled kid. So take me back there to your high school days.
Okay.
And then walk me through that moment where
pot smoke.
Yeah, that version of Caleb. And then take me to that moment when you had your life-altering experience that changed the course of everything. So I'm just going to let you talk for however long you want to talk, and then we'll go back and revisit parts of this.
Okay. Well, let's see. I've been really actually processing this with my wife a lot lately. One of the things we've been really looking at is your brain is actually an organ. And I think one of the things that we've been like really interested in, like my family's had heart problems in the past. And so, you'll go to the doctor and they'll look at your heart and you'll realize like if you need to run, you need to change your diet, you need to do that. Well, your brain is also an organ that sometimes when you get trauma or something's happen to it, like you need to go through counseling, you need to go through care, you need to go through things to actually get your brain to actually fully function properly again.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some things in my life where I think it kind of, my brain kind of got affected. And so one of those things is I grew up in an incredibly awesome family. My mom's a quadriplegic. So my whole childhood is being raised by a mom that can't walk. Right. So that's one lens that I'm just immediately thrust into in life. My dad also is the director at a homeless shelter. So I grew up with a dad that was the men's director at UGM's men's shelter.
Mm-hmm.
And so my childhood was hanging out with homeless people and then having a mom that couldn't walk, but also just the most loving, caring family that just loved people a ton. And my mom just was not a victim at all. So I didn't really even understand that she was in a wheelchair till I got older. I mean, you understand she's in a chair, but she just learned how to do everything, cook, clean. She can sew, she can paint. I mean, she does everything. And I think but once I got a little older and growing up in a religious household, I started feeling like if I prayed hard enough, my mom would get healed. And then if my mom wasn't being healed, it was my fault. And so right there, I started kind of looking through that lens of, and the other thing is like the devil is really good at getting you to look at all the things you don't have instead of the things you do. So even back in the Garden of Eden, it's like these guys had access to the whole garden except for this one tree. And all the devil wanted to do is just get them to focus on this one little thing that they didn't have, right? So I had this amazing family, house, 2 loving parents that are married, but I just had this mom that just wasn't able to walk. That was it, right? And so I just got so focused on that part in my life that I started getting angry and I started having questions. And I started questioning if God was good. Mm-hmm. And I was also going to this school that was a private Christian school. And I didn't feel like I could actually open up or talk about anything that I was wrestling with, or I'd get in trouble, or I'd end up in like a parent teacher conference. And so I got really good at stuffing and really good at hiding. And then being like a pastor's kid in town, I mean, I got really good at living a double life. And so you learn really quickly what people want to hear and then what your reality is. And you get really good at being kind of living a double life. And so as I got into junior high, I just kind of began dabbling a little bit more and more in the double life and started getting introduced to drugs, got introduced to porn at a really young age, and that really affects your brain. Had an encounter with a neighbor girl where I was, we were like 10, 12 years old. And clearly she had been abused because there's just no way she would have known all this stuff. And then my neighbors went to their house and just a young kid and they're watching porn and my other neighbors were. And my parents are older, so they grew up in a time where you could just go kick it in your neighborhood and go play outside all the time. Well, so they just let us do that thinking, hey, you can just go have fun with your friends. And but they had no idea the trouble we were getting in at all the neighborhood kids' houses. And so that kind of started messing with my head a little bit. And then what really happened was in 8th grade, my whole life was all about basketball. Like literally every single thing. I ate, slept, breathed basketball. Went to this little school, and that was how you became the most popular. Like if you were on the basketball team. And so even from like kindergarten, 1st grade, we would all go to the varsity basketball games because the whole school revolved around basketball. And my uncle was the head coach. So that's all I wanted to do is just go to state and win. And what happened was my 8th grade year, I was the varsity point guard in 8th grade. And then I was going to go into high school. And I'm thinking, here we go. Like I'm finally going to be able to go play basketball in high school. And the school split right as I'm going into 9th grade. And so I end up finding myself going from a little private Christian school where I have all these questions, getting thrust into this massive public school where I don't know anybody. And I ended up they had like a 5-day summer ball tryout. And I just showed up the last 2 days because I didn't go to public school. So I didn't know that they were doing the tryouts. My friend and I were talking and he said, hey, I've been doing tryouts for 2 or 3 days. And so I thought, I'll go show up. I played all these guys in AAU. I'll be good enough to make the team, especially for like freshman summer ball, right? So I show up like the last 2 days. And so I didn't really have much of a chance. I mean, looking back on it, I could have done a little bit more, but you're just kind of thrust into this system and you haven't been there. And I remember one time this guy shot the ball and it like the ball bounced out to the 3-point line. And I kind of just jogged over to grab the ball. And this one kid just flew past me and grabbed the basketball. And I'm thinking, I'm better than this kid at basketball. But all the coaches could see is this kid running his heart out to get the ball and me kind of jogging over to get the ball.
Yeah.
I remember a coach literally saying, oh, that kid's way faster than that other one, and writing something down on his paper. And so at the end of the tryout, at the end of that day, there was 3 people that didn't make the team, and I was one of the 3.
Wow.
And that messed me up because all my confidence was shocked. It was messing through my head of like, it's one thing if you grow up and all these coaches see you from day one and they know like, okay, Caleb's one of the best ones out here, but he just kind of went over and jogged to get the ball. It's another thing when they have no clue who you are, anything about you, and some kid out hustles you.
Yeah.
And so instead of going, okay, I'm going to go work harder, I'm going to come back and show these people, I was just so lost and I had no friends. And now I'm not on the basketball team. So I'm lost and I'm like, okay, I'll go try out for cross country or something. Like I need to do something active. So I go and I try out for the cross country team and I hated it because in junior high, you just ran like a mile or 3 miles. In high school, these guys are running like 8-10 miles a day. It just wasn't fun and I didn't enjoy it. But what happened was there was a bunch of senior girls that did cross country. And so all summer I'm like hanging out with all these senior girls and they were fun. They were flirty. And I started getting a lot of attention from them as a freshman boy. And then one day, one of the girls threw me up against the locker and started making out with me. And so I liked that and was like, this is nuts. This is very different from how I grew up. And so that kind of just led me into going into school. And so that was my summer, just kind of like secretly partying and secretly hanging out with these girls. And then when we started school, you go into the locker room or you go into the cafeteria and you're freaked out. Like you don't know anybody. You want to fit in. You don't want to be the weird kid that doesn't have somebody to sit with. Well, the girls invited me over to the table and they let me sit with them. Well, the guys that were sitting at their table were all the kids that smoked pot and fought. And they let me into their group. So immediately that's who I attached myself with, were these kids that were getting into fights, boxing after school and smoking pot. And so that's what I eventually started doing. And then I started meeting people, sneaking out, my dad went on a 40-day fast out in the woods. Like he just grabbed jugs of water and just took off into the wilderness to pray for my mom to get healed. And when he came back, he was super thin, super skinny, and my mom wasn't healed. She still wasn't walking, but God had downloaded to him like to start a church on Monday night, which I'll get back to later, because that's what got us into the anti-trafficking world, was him being obedient to God and actually doing the Monday night church. But at that point, when he was gone for 40 days, I was like the man of the house. Like I felt like I don't have a dad. I'm the man of the house. I can take care of myself. So he comes back. My mom's not healed. I'm really frustrated and confused. I've been partying like crazy for 40 days. And I'm thinking, this is what I want to do. And now he's back and he goes, hey, if you want to live here, these are the rules. And I just decided, okay, I'm going to move out. So at 16, I ended up moving out, and I kind of tricked my dad and said, hey, I got a job. I'm going to live with my neighbor. And I just want to get a job and work hard.
Yeah.
And he didn't realize that really what I was doing was just getting in trouble. And the job that I did have was working at the back of a thrift store. And the back of the thrift store, they were rehabilitating a bunch of felons. So now I'm spending time hanging out with a bunch of felons all day. I'm selling pot. I'm smoking weed. And now I'm around a bunch of guys coming out of prison, which are just teaching me the game. And I'm getting a little bit more into that side of life. And I'm at that age where I'm just trying to fit in, and I wanted to fit in so bad. I just wanted to find my identity at that age. And so I was really easily, just able to kind of go and float, and being a pastor's kid and kind of a chameleon, I was able to kind of pick up like what they wanted from me. And so my identity was just so weird at that time. And so that kind of led me down for like the next 3 years of just being a high school dropout and just smoking pot all the time and being high. And my brain is really fast, and I always thought there's something wrong with me because my brain just is so quick, kind of like ADHD. And until I got an ADHD coach, I didn't understand it was like a superpower. I thought there's something wrong with me. And so I love being high because it just calmed me down. And I didn't have to really deal with my reality. I didn't have to deal with the fact that I was angry about my mom being in a wheelchair. I'd fit in with people. They were really accepting of who I was. So that's kind of what I did for quite some time, and eventually moved back out to the valley and hung out with a bunch of different kids. And these guys weren't necessarily like into gang activity or hard street guys, but they were just good like fighters, and they would just hang out, party, smoke pot, drink, do ecstasy, that kind of scene. And so that's just kind of what I did. And then what happened was my 18th birthday, I remember getting pulled over. We got pulled over because we had smoked like 5 blueberry blunts, and we had got some like blueberry weed and smoked a ton of blunts and just hotboxed the car. And then I had a whole entire cup of alcohol. And I was in the passenger seat. And I guess the car smelled so bad of pot that the cop just, when he pulled us over, he just told us to get out of the car because we hotboxed the crap out of the car. So you could smell it. So he tells us all to get out of the car. They have a dog that comes out. He's searching the car. Luckily, we had thrown all the pot in the trunk, and there was no way to get in the trunk. And we all told the cop like we didn't have any pot on us. And they asked us if anybody had alcohol, and I took it on me. And I said, yeah, there's some alcohol in a cup. It's my 18th birthday. This is all on me. I'm sorry, but this is on me. And this cop was super cool, and he just threw the alcohol out. And he goes, look, man, it's your 18th birthday. Like, I'm not gonna lock you up or anything, but if we find pot, you're all going to jail. And luckily they couldn't get into the back of the trunk, and the car smelled so much like pot. I'm sure the dog just went in there and the whole thing smelled like weed. So somehow we got out of that situation. And a couple like weeks after that, we're fishing, and I'm hanging out with the same friends, and we're sitting down there fishing at Hauser Lake, and these kids come cruising up on their bicycles, and they were in camo, and they just kind of blocked our car. And we were trying to leave after fishing. We were trying to just leave the parking lot, and they wouldn't get out of our way. And so one of my friends honks the horn. The kids slowly kind of move out of the way on their bikes. One of the kids cusses out one of my friends. So then the brakes get stomped. Everyone jumps out of the car, and these 2 kids want to fight my friends. And so that doesn't end well for the other kids. And I end up taking one of the kids' backpack. and honestly, just to punk them, like there was no real reason for other than we just were like, you're stupid. Why would you try and fight us? Took your backpack. So we hop back in the car and I look in the backpack and it's all knives, like throwing knives and weapons. And
Oh my
so
God.
immediately we're like freaking out and we go to Liberty Lake exit by like Centennial Trail and just throw all the weapons in the water, which was pretty stupid because what ends up happening is one of my friends is really well known and a really good athlete. And one of the kids that they got in a fight, his dad was a teacher at the school. So they knew who Levi was right off the bat.
Yeah.
So the dad types in Levi's address at the school, shows up to his house, sees all the fishing gear in his car, knows exactly it's us. So these kids went and told the police. The problem was these kids were like big Idaho kids, and one of them was like 16 that got in a fight with one of my friends. My friend was 19, and so it was not a good situation. And so they go tell the cops that there's a bunch of gangsters that beat them up and took their weapons, and they were just out playing and throwing knives and all this stuff. And so they come to us and they're throwing numbers like 5 to 15 years at us and all the things that they do to kind of scare you.
Wow.
And we end up going and talking with them and kind of letting them know the real situation. And then we couldn't find all the weapons. So they thought we took the weapons and sold them, and we were like gang members and this huge thing, right? Ends up that around that time, like right after that, I was just kind of questioning God still, and I was so angry at him. So every time I'd go to my parents' house and my parents would bring up Jesus or something, I would just like lose it, like literally freak out. But my parents, they stopped preaching to me somewhere along the line, and they just started loving me. So I started wanting to go to their house more, right? And so anytime I'd like hit them with a question, they were ready to like share the gospel or share the Bible with me. But they weren't throwing it down my throat anymore. They were just loving me and waiting for an opportunity. So I came over to my parents' house, and my mom had a bunch of Bible verses on her television, and I wanted to watch like a basketball game, and all I could see was these Bible verses taped to her TV. And she basically told me, like, every time I want to watch TV, I start praying these Bible verses over you, like declaring your future, because I know what you're into. I know you're going to mess your life up. And I remember just freaking out on her and being like, I don't want to hear about your God. If he's so good, why are you in a wheelchair? Like I'm going off. And, a lot of people like, how could you possibly yell at this poor lady in a wheelchair? Like, to me, she's my mom. If you never like got mad and yelled at your mom, like that was my situation that I was in. And so I go downstairs, and I'd been partying so much the night before that I just pass out. And then my whole life just changes immediately, because I'm all of a sudden just not in my body. And as soon as I fall asleep, it's like this incredible dream, but it's not like a normal dream. Like in a normal dream, if you fall and you're about to hit the ground, you wake up. If you jump in the water, like you don't feel the water. That's not my situation. I can feel the wind around me. I can feel like it's like I'm physically at a location. And to make a long story short, basically, like I'm walking up a trail, and I see this massive soldier, and he's got like a sword and a spear and a shield, and he's commanding something. I can't see what he's commanding because there's a rock in my way. As soon as I get around the rock, I can see he's commanding this massive army. And all of a sudden I become this guy, and I'm commanding this huge army that's like trying to wake up. You can tell they're waking up to go to battle. And all of a sudden it starts thundering and lightning, and there's this tornado that appears at the end of this camp, but it's upside down. It's like going up into heaven. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's like flipped upside down, and it's thundering and lightning, and it's super dark. And it kind of goes across the whole entire army, and then it stops above my head. And these two doves come down out of the mouth of this tornado, and they pick me up and they carry me to the mouth of this tornado. And I hear this, but this is what freaked me out, is when those doves picked me up, they splashed me with water, and I felt it, and I didn't wake up. And that's when I was like, oh crap, this is different. This is strange. So they pick me up, take me in the mouth of the tornado. And then all of a sudden I hear this loud booming voice when I get to the mouth of the tornado. And it's almost like a TV that had words appear across it. And then I hear this loud voice say, go into all the world, preach the gospel, make disciples, baptize them in my name, go. 3 times. And then doves carry me back down to the top of that mountain.
Yeah.
As soon as they set me down, I wake up. And I'm like having a panic attack almost, because I'm just like freaking out. Like, did that really just happen? Like, is God really real? And why would he call me to go preach to God? Like, why? I'm a high school dropout. I've done nothing. I'm just like a horrible sinner. Like, it was like just the reality of how bad I was just sitting there on me. And so then a couple weeks later, I have another crazy encounter with him, and had in junior high, where I was at that Christian school, is where I really started rebelling. And the Bible says that the sin of rebellion is like the sin of witchcraft.
Yep.
And so I really was rebellious. And so what happens is 2 weeks later, I'm at a friend's house, and all my friends are sitting there smoking pot. And even though I started reading the Bible because of that dream and listening to Christian radio, I still was, those were all my friends. Like, this is all I knew, right? So I wanted to go see my friends, and I get up there and they're all smoking weed and they're passing the bong, and I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do this again. Like, am I allowed to do this? Am I going to get struck by lightning? Like, these are all the thoughts I'm having.
Wow.
But I'm also like the little brother in the group, remember? Because everyone was older than me when I was a freshman. And so I'm like, I don't want to get called a punk or anything like that. So they go to pass the weed to me, and a friend of mine, her dad was a pastor. And as soon as I go to hit the weed, he shows up on the television for a TV commercial. So I'm like, and I just texted her earlier, said, I'm going to change my life. Da, 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 da. And then all of a sudden I'm sitting there about to hit the bong, and her dad's staring me in the face on the TV. And it was like something fell in the room, and it fell on me, which I know now was the Holy Spirit, but I didn't understand what it was. It felt like a blanket kind of covered me. And all of a sudden something lifted out of my brain. And it was like the first time in 3 or 4 years I could think clearly. And I was like, what am I doing here? Like, I'm 3.5 years behind high school. My brother, I haven't been a good brother. Like, I just left my brother at home with my parents. I've just been out partying, like putting my life in danger. Like, I've just been a horrible son. Like, all this reality hits me at once, and I almost start crying. So I just dip out. I just take off and I run to get to my car because I'm feeling overwhelmed and I don't know what all this is. And I turn on the car, and I think I had turned the Christian radio on the way up there. So all of a sudden I'm in the car, and it's like this music has Jesus's name in it. And I had just opened myself up to so much demonic stuff, and all this stuff couldn't even hear the name Jesus.
Wow.
And I started like literally having demons leave me. And like, so I'm driving and I feel like my eyes are on fire. I'm just going, God, you've never been there for me. And then a song would come on, like, I'll be by your side. I've been there the whole time, son. Like, I'll be by your side whenever. So I'm just weeping. Like, every time I'm yelling at God, he's just hitting me with love through the song. And I'm sitting there going, and like all this stuff's flying out of me. And I feel like I'm literally puking in my car. I feel like my eyes are on fire. My arms are cramping. Like, stuff's just like leaving my body because they couldn't hear the name Jesus. They were so scared of this powerful name, Jesus. And I ended up driving somehow back to the school that I started being rebellious, and the car got parked right in front of the cross. And I felt like I lost 90% of my body. I just felt so light. I felt like I'd lost everything, like just this rage, this anger, like everything that I had in me. Like, I used to, because when you're selling drugs and stuff, like, you have to be able to flip a switch. Like, you're little and you're younger than everybody. Like, I would go into a room and I'd start looking for like a candle, or like, if something happens, what am I going to do to fight my way out of this? Right. So you'd have to flip this rage thing on. And all of a sudden I was gone. Like, I didn't have the ability to do that anymore.
Wow.
And the other thing was, I was driving home and I was like seeing my mom praying for me and all this crazy stuff. So all I know to do is just call my dad. And I'm like, hey, Dad, has Mom been praying for me? That's all I said to him. And he starts crying on the phone. And he goes, dude, your mom and I haven't stopped praying for you since you left, because we knew what you were going to go do. We just knew. We just knew you were going to go get high or do something with your friends. And I was like, I don't really know how to explain this. Can you just come down to Valley Christian, which was like right down the street from our house? And so he shows up, and I'm just covered in sweat. And I just tell him what happened, and I just start weeping. And I'm like, Dad, I've messed my whole life up. I'm so sorry. Like, I don't know how I got here. So we just cried and like hugged. And then I ended up going to my parents' house. He like kind of followed me home. And I go into my mom's room, and the same shirt that I saw her praying for me in, she was wearing. And it just tripped me out. And I'm like, I tell my mom, I'm like, Mom, I don't know what to do. I just ruined my life. And she just goes, well, son, let's just pray that God gives you a second chance. And we just prayed. And the next day I ended up going back to my alternative school. Like, I was completely out of school. I was just going to an alternative school and just telling my parents I was going to alternative school when I really was never showing up. And so I showed up, and this lady, Carolyn, who's now a volunteer for our ministry, she was there. She was one of the school counselors at Bowders Contract. And I go in, and she goes, I shouldn't tell you this, but I've been praying for you. And she goes, there's this opportunity called ESD 101, and it's a reentry program. And if you go, it's a summer school. And if you go and you basically pass all the classes, then you get a waiver to go back to any high school and be a senior. And this was my junior year. And I'm like, okay, but now I'm sober. Now I'm like decided to follow God. Now I've changed my life. Like, I'm deciding to make that change, right? And so I ended up going back to this class called ESD 101. And if you missed one day, you showed up late, you didn't do one homework assignment, like 3 strikes, you're out. But if you pass, you get a waiver. You can go to any high school you want and be a senior. But if you fail one class your senior year, not only like do they strip everything you just worked for your senior year, but they strip everything you did that summer. This is like your last opportunity. And so I pass, and I get through it faster than anybody else in the class. And I end up getting to meet the mayor. It was pretty cool. And then I go back to Bowders Contract School and to be a senior. But this time I'm like, this isn't where I fit in. Like, I'm not smoking anymore. I'm not drinking. I'm not partying. And I just wanted to go back to U High. So I went back to University High School. They let me in. And I remember the first day I walk in, I talked to the counselor and Deputy Duncan, who is the cop. And he's like, what are you doing here? And I told him the story, and they're just like in shock because they're just thinking, dude, there's
How old are you at this point?
18.
You're 18.
So I was already 18, which was great because the other thing my parents said, there's like, dude, we're so tired of the school calling all the time, every day, like trying to get you out. So they signed a paper that says I was an adult and I could get myself out of school. Yeah. So they said, listen, we know, like, if you're going to do this, you're just going to do it. If you're not going to. Mm-hmm. And so I go in, I talk to the teacher, to Mr. Marshall, and I'm telling him the story. And he goes, dude, can you help me with I do like a class once a week for kids struggling with drug addiction. Would you want to be a part of that class? And I'm like, sure. So I go into that class, and every single kid that was in that class I had smoked or sold weed to.
Oh my gosh.
Like every single one of them, or done coke or like ecstasy with. Like, it wasn't just pot.
Yeah.
And so now all of a sudden I'm like, dude, you guys got to go to church with me. And they're just looking at me like I'm crazy because I was the kid that had the house where we party at. And now I'm like completely changed. But it was like one of those things, like, when we had COVID, like if everybody thought they were going to die and then you found like the antidote, you would go tell everybody. Mm-hmm. That's how I felt. I was like, dude, we're all lost trying to figure this out. And I figured, like, I found it. It's God. He's real. Like I just had to share it with everybody. It was like I was blind and then I could see. Like it was just that real to me. So I couldn't help it. It was just who I was from then on. And I knew I was called to just share the gospel with people and share about Christ and share what he had done in my life. And so I started kind of working with a pastor. And at that time I went to a church that only had like 3 guys in the youth group because I had burned every bridge in town. And with my last name being Altmeyer in Spokane, like a lot of people knew my family. So I went to this tiny church called Victory Faith. There was only 3 guys in the youth group. And now it's a huge church. And so it was crazy to be able to be a part of something so small and like help see it grow. And then I ended up doing a discipleship school through there, traveled, went to New York for a little bit, came home, realized I had a calling, but I didn't have the character. So I did this 2-year discipleship school. And at the end of it, all that I was allowed to do was start a small group. I wasn't really allowed to preach. I wasn't really allowed to. My dad would let me come down and preach a little bit at UGM. So I learned how to speak at a homeless shelter, which is a unique situation. Yeah. But it was great because everybody down there didn't judge you. Like you just could be yourself, And I think that was the coolest place for me to learn how to speak and how to share my story with a bunch of people that were just super down to earth and could relate to what I was going through. And so what was crazy is like I ended up going into, so I ended up getting through the discipleship school and I thought, I want to be a youth pastor or something like that. Like that was just my initial thought. But the reality is that I just wasn't ready. And I also didn't have a calling to be in the church. So every single time I would be like in class in discipleship school, I'd be sitting there looking out the window thinking of like how I could go reach my friends in the community and how I could go uh, share what I was doing and what I was learning with people that would never come to the church, because that was the thing that I was struggling with. Was I'm like, this is the coolest message in the world and it's saving so many people's lives, but the only way to hear it is you have to come into the building.
Yeah.
And I'm like, none of my friends are going to come into the building. Like, they don't even understand anything about church. The only thing they think of is like uh, the stories that you hear of Catholic priests abusing kids, and like that's literally like
Yep.
all they know, right? So I'm sitting there going, the Bible's so clear. It says like, don't hide the light under like the bushel, basically, right? So like in my mind, it says like, be a light to the world and don't hide your light. And so the visual I always had was almost kind of like a building with a light inside the building, but the only way to see the light would you have to go into the building. And I was like, how do we get the light outside of the building and actually start impacting our culture and our community? And one of the things that I was realizing was most of the kids that were coming to the church and that I was ending up mentoring, or where all the kids are like smoking weed, getting in trouble, didn't have a really good home life. And so if somebody came in and they smelled like pot or something, they just sent them over to me. And that was fine because I love those kids. That was me, right? But the biggest thing I noticed was 2 hours a week on Wednesday night just really wasn't enough for these kids. They needed a lot more than that. They needed family. And so at 22, I was like, yeah, I'm going to start a small group. It's the only thing that I was really allowed to do at the time because of just where I was at. And so I thought, well, I'll just be faithful with this and let's see what happens. Well, it turns out that small group kind of blew up. And then all of a sudden I have like 30 kids coming to my parents' house every week. And one week we would go play sports and then invite all their friends to play like ultimate frisbee or something like that. And then the next week I'd invite them all back to my parents' house and we'd provide pizza, and then we'd just open the Bible and like talk about it. And it was just for young guys, and it just kept growing and growing and growing. And finally my parents were like, we got to figure something out because we can't have this many kids over here all the time. And they were calling me like every day. So at this point I'm working at a gym and I'm working at Tomato Street, and I've got all these kids that are hitting me up all the time. And I finally was just like, I gotta try it. Like, I gotta just go all in. Wasn't married. I didn't need a lot of money. Let me just see where this goes. And so talked with my friend. We turned his house into basically a youth center. And then kids every day after school from like 3 to 6, they would just come over to our house and hang out. We played Mario Kart with them, mentor them. We were like a big brother program, basically on steroids. And then on Wednesdays, we'd shut the house down. We'd all go to church. So now it was easy for me to invite all the kids to church because everyone's intimidated to go to church because they don't know anybody.
Right.
But if like we're all hanging out every day of the week, and then on Wednesday everyone's at church, then we're all rolling to church. And now it's not intimidating to go because you feel like you already know everybody. So that started working really, really well. And I thought, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. Like, I'm just going to plant these types of houses and help churches get kids and start mentoring kids throughout the week, and kind of an adaptation of the typical youth center, but utilizing homes, because that's what I wanted to do. And that's what my friends did, right? We'd get out of school and then we just go to somebody's house where there wasn't a parent, and we just hang out. And that's all these kids really wanted to do. And we were in our early 20s, and so they thought we were cool and looked up to us. And so it was this great opportunity to mentor them for something good instead of something bad. But then what ended up happening was in like 2014-ish, my dad is running that church service on Monday nights. He had been doing that for a while, and somebody comes into his church and comes up to him at the altar and starts telling him her story, that she'd been trafficked from the age of 6. And the why it was so real to us is my next door neighbor. So my next door neighbor growing up, who I thought was like a babysitter to us because she'd come over all the time, she's the one that was being trafficked the whole time.
Wow.
We had no idea. And so she starts opening up to my dad that like her parents were like into witchcraft and all this crazy stuff, and would like sell her for rituals and all this stuff. And she had been so abused that she needed all these surgeries and all this internal organ issues and like all this things. Because when you're 6 or 7, 8 years old, you're a grown man, like
holy
that messes
crap,
you up, right?
Yeah.
And so that was kind of our entrance into the world of human trafficking and sex trafficking. And my dad came home and he kind of started telling me her story. And it was so hard for me to believe that there was that much evil out there So I went and I met with her, and she was out in a cabin on somebody's property, terrified, scared to death, like just her brother had been murdered, like just crazy life situation. And she starts telling me her story, and I'm just like, this is insane. This is so intense, and my heart's just breaking, right? And I'm like, this is not the same girl that I remember, because
Yeah.
the girl I remember, um, you know, she was like the first girl I had a crush on. She was a few years older than me. I thought she was like, she'd come over and hang out with us and watch us and kind of babysit us. And I just remember her hair smelled so good.
Yeah.
It was like the weirdest thing as a young boy. And I think what's interesting is like, so since my mom was in a wheelchair, we'd always have to sit in her lap, and we'd like cruise around in the wheelchair, and it was fun, but I never actually like sat behind my mom. And so when she would come over, I'd sit behind her and brush her hair. And I just remember being like, wow, her hair smells really good.
Yeah.
And that's a weird memory to have, but I still remember that, like 5 or 6 years old, just thinking, wow, her hair smells so good. So that's like the first memory I have of this girl. And so now I see her, 20 years later, and she's just broken and hurting. And she was still fun and had her personality, but she had been through a lot. So I go back to my youth center and my team, and we're having our weekly staff meeting, and I'm just not there, like mentally. I'm just checked out because I'm just processing everything I heard. And these guys are like my best friends. And there was one girl that worked for us, and she was my coworker. And I start telling the story, and she starts crying.
Wow.
And she starts like opening up, and she tells us she has the exact same story, and that her dad used to work at a prison and would sell her to all his prison guard buddies. And she said that was the reason why when my dad would come to see me, she'd always walk into the back room.
Yeah.
Because my dad is like a boxer and rides a motorcycle, and he's like a man's man, and it kind of would remind her of all the guys that worked at the prison that she would get sold to.
Yep.
So whenever he'd come in to see me, she'd just walk into the back room because she'd be getting triggered, and I had no clue. And so all of a sudden now she's opening up. And I remember after about a month after she opened up, and my dad just coming in to see me occasionally, she realized he really was safe. And this is what's embedded in my brain is it took her maybe like 10 minutes to walk 10 yards to give my dad a hug, because she was trembling in fear and crying. She was so scared to get a hug from a loving dad.
Yeah.
Because all she ever knew was an abusive father that would sell her, and she would be abused over and over and over again. And that'll never get out of my brain. Just knowing how loving and protective and how great my dad is, and how terrified she was of him, and how she was still functioning in society, and nobody knew like the trauma that she was going through every single day. And that's when my dad and I sat down, and we were like, okay,
this is what we're doing.
Yeah, my dad was the one that was like, I can't do this anymore, Caleb. Like, I got to do something about it. Like, I'm going to retire, and I'm going to open up a safe house, and you can run the youth stuff, and you run all the outreaches, and I'll tackle the anti-trafficking house. And so he retired, used all his retirement money, and opened up the first safe house in town. And we thought we were going to help 2 or 3 women, and instead we had 21 women go through our house in 9 months. And that's kind of when we realized what we had stumbled upon. And I remember at that point, my dad is just a huge heart and a huge rescuer and a really good person at ministering, but his brain doesn't think like a CEO or like how to run a company, and mine does. And I remember sitting there realizing, man, if this is gonna work, like, I'm gonna have to do this. Like, there's no way around it. I'm gonna have to step in with my dad. It can't just be one of the things we do. I'm gonna have to learn how to do this. I'm gonna have to, because for the first 4 or 5 months, I just kind of stayed in my lane, but I was watching how intense it was, and it was so different from any type of other ministry thing that we'd ever done. Right? They're coming out of the situation on drugs. They've been abused 10 times a day. Like, it's really heavy stuff. And I'm going, I need to be able to build a structure and hire professional trained staff to actually be able to do this properly. But I was like 25, 26, 27, somewhere in there, like young, and just did not have a clue on what I was doing. And so I had to really, really go learn. And my wife and I had to completely adjust our life. And, when we started, I was making $500 a month, and we were living above somebody's $400 living in 400 square feet of somebody's garage that didn't even have laundry. We'd have to go do laundry at my parents' house on the weekends, and it was like rice and beans and beans
Wow.
and rice. And then she was still working at the college, and then we just decided we both just had to go all in, and that was about 2017, and we just have been going ever since.
Wow. Okay. I've got questions.
Yeah.
So we're going to get into those because that was a really amazing testimony story. And I think that there's a lot to unpack here.
Sure.
So that was quite the story. And I'm sure our audience has a lot of well. So I want to go back to the piece about your mom, like praying for you and praying over you.
Yeah.
And I know for me personally, like I've felt the power of prayer because my grandmother prays for like 2.5 hours every day.
Yeah,
her prayer book is just, it's crazy. Even like energetically on a cellular level, like I can transmit energy to you and I don't even need to be near you. You know what I mean? So, but you have to be willing to receive it. Right. And it's just crazy because the experience that you had, the only times I've heard of people having these really vivid experiences and encounters with God are when they've been on like ayahuasca or some sort of crazy trip or near death, right? Where they've actually died and come back. So you weren't on anything when you had these experiences, right?
No.
So that just kind of makes it all the more real. And that probably told you like, this is legitimate. This is God speaking to me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I had no question in my mind.
So, okay.
It's also just a mix of like terror of like, you know, the fear of the Lord when you just realize how small you are. I mean, when you really realize how big God, like this is a God, if you believe the Bible, like that breathed out the universe. He breathed out our world. He spoke. That's a massive being.
Yep.
And you realize really quickly how small you are. And you're just like, dude, this is intense, you know? And it was overwhelming. And then plus what he said to me was very clearly Jesus's last words to his disciples. And so that little phrase in Matthew, go into all the world, preach the gospel, make disciples, like that's what he says. This is his commandment to the disciples when he leaves to go to heaven. And so it was just, what are the chances, right?
So yeah, I think one of the most fascinating things about your story is that moment when your friend, the pastor, showed up on the TV.
Yeah.
Like God, not only was he protecting you, but he was speaking to you through other channels as well.
Yeah.
Like literally other channels. Yeah. And I always say like, it's funny because sometimes your experiences and what you've been through doesn't make sense to you until you've like kind of arrived at your purpose. Yeah. And I always say we're best equipped to help the prior versions of ourselves. So it's just crazy how like some people need to graduate into this and you had this like switch that flipped, which is so bizarre. That tells you a lot about your moment with God and that it was absolutely real. So what other ways has he kind of like shown up in your life? I know when you had the babysitter, right? And just finding that out about her, but like, was that kind of your moment when you were like, this is the lane I need to go into?
That was just the beginning.
That was just the beginning.
Yeah. So since then, it's like every day he's showing up in my life. And I think just even, you know, finding my wife and having kids. But I think even more simply than that, when I started the ministry, this is how simple it was. Me and my friend just got a whiteboard and we put up on the whiteboard all of the things we needed, all of our prayer requests. And it was like day after day, just miracle after miracle would happen. So like situations that didn't even make sense. Like we would need something and then like someone would just call us out of nowhere and be like, hey, you know, like for instance, we were like, hey, we really need food. And then somebody called us and said, hey, I work for, you know, Little Caesars and we would love to be able to give you guys pizza for the kids like the next day, you know, just stuff like that over and over and over. And that's how we've run the ministry to this day. So even on Wednesdays when we have our staff meeting, I have a huge whiteboard and on the back side of it's just all our prayer requests. And we just take time and we pray.
Yeah.
And we just see God move.
And that's what happens when you surrender to God and when you create space for him to come in. This is actually the premise of a TED Talk that I'm going to do called The Valley, and how the Valley actually creates space for the people that are supposed to step into your life to actually come in and influence you in the right ways, right? And this is really a testament to like the power of surrendering. And whether you believe in God or not, like you're straight up manifesting, right? Because you've given yourself up to something greater.
Yeah.
Right. Now I want to get into the sex trafficking stuff before we like dive into some of the emotional aspects of what you do.
Yeah.
You really opened my eyes to what sex trafficking means, because I think a lot of us believe that sex trafficking is, you know, somebody that wants to play a fun game and wins a fun prize. You know, they go out on the streets, they get involved in drugs, they start selling themselves to support their habit, and then they end up getting trafficked. But you really opened my eyes to the fact that like some people have no choice. They, you know, this could be blackmail. They could have been in foster care and they ended up in the wrong household. So walk me through the different forms of quote sex trafficking.
Yeah. Well, there's really like four main ways.
Okay.
So of like what I would call like four different types of traffickers. So we'll just start there. But I think so. The main thing you got to understand is the difference between sex work and sex trafficking. So sex work is when somebody chooses to do it. They get to keep the money. They get to choose when. They get to choose where. They get to choose who they get to do it with, right? And then sex trafficking is when somebody's using force, fraud, or coercion to get somebody to perform a sex act.
Yep.
And the way that happens typically is through four different ways. And so the one that's really challenging, was hard for me to wrap my mind around, was like what they call like the lover boy or the boyfriend way. And what that is these are guys that are literally looking to have women fall in love with them so that they can manipulate them into doing commercial sex acts. So for instance, I have a friend. She was 13. Her mom and dad got a divorce, and her parents just kind of drank and smoked pot all the time. And she ended up going over to Seattle, and they were living out of a motel. And there was a guy in his 30s literally looking for girls that he could pimp out, that were wanting attention, that were wanting to be loved. And basically what he would do is you'd take her out, buy her things, take her out to dinner, treat her really well, try and make her feel like, you know, he really cared. Then he started kind of grooming her in a way of trying to play different games, trying to get her to be desensitized to the sex acts and just, you know, all the stuff that goes with that. And then also he starts isolating her more and more and more against her dad. Like, well, your dad doesn't really love you. Look, he's just smoking pot. Look, I care about you. I'll take care of you. So now all of a sudden she's starting to get isolated, starts falling in love with him, thinks that he really loves and cares about her because he's saying all the things to get her to think that he really cares about her. Then all of a sudden, you know, he's like, hey, I've got this beautiful house in LA. Why don't you just come move in with me? I'll take care of you. And that's all she wants, right? She just wants somebody to love her and take care of her and care for her and love her for who she is, not just what she can give somebody sexually. And all of a sudden they're driving down to Bend, Oregon, and now he starts telling her like, hey, listen, I am going to buy you clothes. I am going to feed you. I'm going to house you, but here's what you're going to have to do for it, right? And it's going to be clothes that you probably would never buy for yourself. So he takes her shopping for all sorts of stuff that she would never buy and puts her out on the street, and then he ends up selling her. And anytime she tried to leave, he beats her and throws her in an ice bath. But he didn't get her by grabbing her and chucking her in the trunk of a car, you know, or manipulating her or like, you know, tricking her into, you know, coming and doing drugs. And which is what happens a lot of times. Like they will get on drugs and they'll either start doing drugs to numb themselves to be able to perform the acts that they need to do, or somebody will give them drugs to be able to control them. But in this situation, it wasn't anything like that. It was just all through relationship of just wanting to be loved. And, you know, and after you do this for a while and you listen to trainings, you listen to different things like that, this literally some of the tactics these guys do is they'll literally say like, you need to find them, you got to sleep with them, you got to have sex with them, you got to make sure that they love you, and then you start getting them into the thought of maybe you should sell yourself on OnlyFans, maybe you should sell yourself on the webcam, maybe we should, you know, go out and hook up with other girls and getting them into the sex industry. Like it's all planned, it's all coordinated. It's not and that's where these women, that's why it says force, fraud, and coercion, right? So a lot of times we think of trafficking, we think of somebody being forced or being threats of force or something with a gun if they don't do this. And a lot of times it's not that. Sometimes it's just fraud. It's being tricked. It's being manipulated. It's being kind of coerced into this lifestyle where somebody the whole time was looking through the lens of, I'm going to sleep with this girl so I can get her to fall in love with me, so I can get her into doing commercial sex acts.
And think about it, like dopamine and those chemicals that our body releases when we fall in love with somebody, that is one of the most addictive drugs out there, right?
Yeah.
And so
if you're 13, 14, 15 years older, this is all you've ever known or all you've ever been told since you were a young girl is the biggest thing about you, the most important thing about your sexuality, then you don't even like, that's just the lens you're looking through. So you think this is normal, this is what guys do, and all of a sudden you're just they get caught up in it really quick. And then a lot of times what happens is they do end up getting into drugs. And then and this is what happened to her, right? She ended up getting addicted to drugs just to be able to get through the day. And then even when she finally was able to escape, she had this long road of recovery from drug addiction.
Wow. And okay, so that kind of brings me to the next question of, our area, right? I feel like we've got a strong false sense of security here. I've never looked at Spokane or even the Coeur d'Alene area as unsafe. I feel like I've been in, major cities, Chicago, the Bay Area, and I did not walk with my headphones in. I didn't walk in the dark. I looked over my shoulder. I don't do that here. And I think what we don't see, those invisible threats, are the most dangerous to us. It's our ignorance that is the most dangerous threat to ourselves, right? And I had no idea how prominent of an issue this was up here. So take me through, because, think about it. We're not near the southern border, right?
Yeah. And that's the other thing, because that's what I was going to say. So like, that's the one way, right, is through basically through the lover boy tactic way. And then the other one would be somebody that's more of an enabler. So that's somebody that's actually looking for girls that are already partying, and then all of a sudden they're already into drugs. And then they're like, hey, listen, come be with me. I'll get you into these circles. I'll help you, we'll make some real money, and then I'll just provide you with as much drugs or alcohol as you want. Right. Mm-hmm. So there is some of that where they're looking for somebody that's already in the lifestyle of that, partying, drugs, sex, commercial sex acts, stuff like that. Then the other part is they'll actually train girls to be bottom girls and go recruit other friends. Right. So there'll be somebody that they'll actually train to be like, hey, listen, you go meet this girl, you start telling her like how fun it would be to have a threesome, all the different things, how much money you can make. Like, they'll send girls in with new iPhones, new shoes, new stuff, all the things that might tell the other girls like, hey, I want to be like, I want what you have. How are you getting this money? And then they say, well, I just go on these dates. Right. So they actually will train people to go recruit for them. And then finally is that like violent pimp or that violent trafficker. And that's what you're talking about. That's what you're thinking of. Like, I don't want to be walking down the street. Someone's going to kidnap me and throw me into a car. That's like 1% of sex trafficking cases.
Wow.
And that's what everybody thinks of because we watch the movie Taken, we watch Sound of Freedom, and those things happen and they're sad, but that's not what normally happens. And then everybody starts to think, well, trafficking must be like at the border. It must be, and they confuse human trafficking with human smuggling. And oftentimes they come together. So somebody could be getting smuggled over the border, which could easily get turned into human trafficking. I've been down to in Houston, we have a partner, and I've seen pictures of trees, and I've seen pictures of like people that to get over here, they go through with the cartel, and they have trees where they have handcuffs tied to the trees, and these girls, and they throw their lingerie up in the trees as trophies. It's sick, right? And that does happen. And that's what's in our brain when we think of human trafficking. Right. But the reality is it could be a 13-year-old girl that is meeting this guy, thinks that she really likes him. Now he's asking her for nude photos. And the next thing you know, she's sending him a video. And now he's saying, hey, you got to keep sending me these photos, or I'm going to send this to your parents, or I'm going to send this to your friend. Wow. Or
basically
blackmailing her basically into getting into performing commercial sex acts, and he feels like he owns her. So there's a lot more to it than just human smuggling aspect of trafficking. You don't have to go across borders or across state lines to be trafficked. You could be trafficked by your own parents in your own city, in your own house.
Wow. Real quick, I'm going to plug this in again because I don't want to run out of juice for the video. But this is good. Sorry, you're going to hear that noise. Is this one on?
Yeah.
Because then you can charge this dirty laptop. Okay, so I'm kind of building up to what you're working on now, but also I didn't realize again how prominent it is up here. Is it because of our logistics where we're kind of bordering a few nearby states?
It's just everywhere.
It's everywhere.
And I think that's the trick, is that's what's interesting, is like no matter where I travel, this is happening. So I remember when we first got into it, we would I'd go to 3 or 4 different states, and every state would say we're the 3rd highest trafficking in the nation. Right now with Shared Hope actually gives like each state a rank, and you can tell kind of where you're at. I think Washington, I think the last time we were looking, the last thing I heard was that we had like the 6th most amount of trafficking cases per capita of like people that had current or had been trafficked in Washington State. And that was through the Fulcrum Institute. But the thing is yes, there is definitely the human smuggling aspect of trafficking in a circuit where you're in Seattle and you're by the
ports or whatever. Yep.
And then you got Portland and then you have Tri-Cities and Spokane, and there is some of that human smuggling aspect to it, but a lot of it is just a generation of people that have been groomed to believe the most important thing about them is their sexuality.
Yep.
And so that's everywhere in the United States. It's all over the place. And we also do have quite a lot of homelessness. We do have quite a lot of drug addiction. We do have a huge fentanyl problem. But unfortunately, that's like everywhere now.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is all
tied together.
Yep. And so that's where I'm looking. I'm like, man, we have a bigger cultural issue that's funneling and fueling sex trafficking, which is just, because if you think about it, when you're a young guy and you're, 13, 10, 11 years old, and you're starting getting addicted to pornography, and basically the industry is trying to get you addicted to porn, you're mentally telling yourself to look at a woman as an object and not as a human.
Yep.
From a young age. And now your brain is getting the way your brain thinks, it's literally being trained to think like that. And then as soon as you become think about it, when you were like 5th, 6th, 7th grade, like when did culture start screaming at you like the most important thing about you is your body and what you look like?
Gosh, well, we didn't have the internet back then, right? So I probably looked at like magazines like of beautiful people, or TV, like that was culture screaming to me. But like the internet's a very dark place.
Or the mall, or just like it doesn't matter. Like wherever you go, it's almost like culture's just telling girls like the most important thing about you is your sexuality.
Yep.
And when you have a mix of young women that are being told that, and a mix of young guys that are looking as women as objects, it does not take long for you to start seeing an uptick in people going, well, you know what, I'll look at porn. Okay, fine. I'll go to the club. All right. Well, I don't know. I just buy an escort.
Yep.
Like it doesn't take long for things to kind of go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. And sex sells. Yeah. And I think what really bothers me today is, people will just post pictures of themselves in their bra and underwear so freely. And it's like, anybody can take anything from you these days, right? Like all of our information's out there. And the one thing you have to preserve is your body, right? That's like the one sacred temple that you have left. So it really bothers me when women are just putting this out there, because it's not making the problem, any better. It's, you know what I mean? It's just creating a bigger issue. And I think it's also creating a space where more people are more likely to fall into things like sex trafficking, because they're inviting in the attention from the wrong people, right? So, okay, I want to get into the strip club, because recently you acquired a major hub in our hometown, which is the Deja Vu strip club. And I remember every Friday when my dad would pick us up, because it was his weekend, we'd drive down Sprague and we'd see the Deja Vu, and we would always make jokes about it. And I've never been in there, but when you took over that strip club, it was a huge deal for our community. I had no idea what a hub that was for sex trafficking. And one of the things you said to me was like, that was actually a better alternative than being on the streets and stuff, even though it was still terrible. So that's why women would go there to work there, because it was just a better alternative. So walk me through how that opportunity came up and some of the things that you had to work through in order to acquire that building.
Yeah, and I think like so, and it's a little tricky. So I've heard a lot of stories since I bought the building. So like for instance, one of the ladies that's a manager, she's going to be emceeing our gala. She was a manager there for a lot of years. She tells me a lot of behind the scenes stories that she experienced the first time she did meth was in there. But it's not like the strip. It's not like the strip club itself is sitting there trafficking women.
Right.
So when we say like, hey, this is a hub for trafficking, it's not like the strip clubs are sitting there going, hey, we want to force people against their will to do this. The issue is that a lot of the girls that we work with that have been trafficked, they have gone through strip clubs.
Yep.
Right. So somebody's going to or they're going to take them to strip clubs to desensitize them to this industry and sex industry. So there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that can get easily connected to a club, right? And even we found even material in the club of trainings on trafficking, because they wanted to make sure these women were choosing to work there and they weren't being tricked or manipulated into it, because it's happened in the past, right? And so, and for us, from my lens of working with like over 200 women that we've helped in our ministry, a lot of them have been trafficked or have gone through clubs. And so when I was first hearing, the story of, well, let me back up. So what happened was we were doing long-term care, and then all of a sudden we started getting a lot more local phone calls. We had women show up to our office. We had people like literally on fentanyl showing up to our office wanting out of the life. And we were really set up to take women from other cities that were already rescued and were getting clean to come into our long-term recovery program. Right. So we weren't really set up for local women to try and help get them out of town, because when we started, there was a couple other organizations that said that's what they wanted to do. And so that was kind of why we kind of went more into the long-term care. Well, as time's gone on, we just were still seeing this huge need. And we didn't see some of the stuff that we were hoping that would have getting handled. And so we finally were like, all right, we're going to probably have to do some of the more short-term stuff for our city, and we're going to have to be able to have a house that has full-time 24-hour staff that are rotating, that actually are trained on how to handle this. And so that's why we started kind of looking and doing a strategic plan and going, all right, we also were basically being known just for our anti-trafficking efforts. So when we started, we had a food bank, food distribution, men's recovery house, like we had all this different stuff. And then the anti-trafficking house was just one small part of our organization. Well, fast forward, and it's like that's pretty much all we were getting known for, and that's what people really wanted us to tackle and handle and be like the experts in town on human trafficking. So we ended up this last year sitting down and going through a strategic plan and going, okay, let's close everything that's not anti-trafficking related. Let's change our name to Helping Captives so that people understand exactly who we are and what we're about. And if we were going to build the best organization, where would we start? And we said, okay, well, first we'd start trying to prevent it. So we tried to do education classes. So we opened up an education center and started doing 5 different trainings that are rotated to help people be equipped and understand what trafficking is, what grooming is, how to work with trafficking survivors, all of that stuff, to be able to try and help our community, because it's easier to prevent trafficking from happening than help somebody that's been raped 10 times a day for 5 years. Right. And so that was our first thing. And then we thought, okay, the next thing is we need something, if somebody is coming out of trafficking, we need an immediate place for them to go and get clean. And so that's what we started using all of our facilities for. And then we were going, okay, we really need to expand their emergency care. And we started getting women that wanted outpatient. So people that had already been trafficked, or they have a job and a career, and they don't need a full inpatient class, but they want to be a part of a community and a part of group that understands the pain that they've gone through and the trauma they've been through. So we kind of started dabbling in outpatient, and that started, the need for that just started increasing like crazy. So we were sitting down going, we really need a headquarters that would be also allow us to be able to have would be able to allow us to have outpatient, and then also like a 24-hour drop-off location in the future.
Right.
Because sex trafficking doesn't happen Monday through Friday from 9 to 5.
Right.
And so we were really praying about, do we build something at one of our other locations, some of the property that we have, but our team really wanted to have something in town because they were like, we need something on a bus line. We'd love to have our headquarters in town. Um, and we needed something that was big enough to also offer classes and outpatient therapy. And so as we were writing through our strategic plan, and we kind of got done with it, like within 3 days, somebody emails me over that the Deja Vu had closed down.
Whoa.
And he actually hit me up and said, hey, I have an idea for a community center. I also think this would be really, it'd be cool if there was an anti-trafficking organization that was in the community center. And I'm looking at it through a totally different lens going, no, that would be a full anti-trafficking location and headquarters for us. But at first I was thinking this can't be the building. Like it just, there's no way. I don't see it. I'm also wondering how women would take it if we purchased a strip club, and that would they get triggered, like all
Right.
the different things. But that night I just could not sleep, and I'm just sitting there, and my wife's sitting next to me, and she just goes, "You're gonna go look at the club, huh?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I think I'm going to." And she goes, "Well, I've been married to you long enough. Like, just go do it because I don't want to hear about it for the next three
Yep.
months. Like, because unless you get it out of your system, like it's going to be a long, you know, you're going to be talking about it forever. So just go check it out." So I get the green light from my wife, and that's all I need. So I'm like, I immediately hit up the guy on the paper that's the realtor. He gets me in the next day. He goes, "It's already under contract, but I like what you guys are doing. I'll try and get you in between like 2 and 3 o'clock." And so I'm at the office, and then randomly, our anti trafficking program director and a survivor of trafficking show up at 1 o'clock.
Whew.
And I'm
Got
like,
chills.
"Hey, could you guys come with me? Because I would love to see through your lens if this would be a decent building or if this would even be something worth looking into. I don't know how we're going to get the money. I don't understand. I just know that I feel something like maybe God's crazy enough to turn a building that used to objectify women into a place that heals them. And maybe that would be how he can show our community how much he cares about his daughters, right?" And so I'm sitting there thinking this. We go down there, and the trafficking survivor is the one that was the most excited about it. She was
Wow.
like, "We got to do this. We got to do this. This is exactly what God does for us. He like completely changes us and gives us a new purpose and a new like, destiny and a new reason for living." And she's just selling me hard on it, right? And we realized it was a concrete box and there's no windows. So it's a very secure building. It's on a bus line. It could easily be used 24/7. People can go in there till 4 o'clock in the morning forever. And it was just every single thing that we needed was in this one location. And I was just told the guy, I said, "Hey, if it falls through, just let me know." And so 2 weeks later, he calls me and says, "Hey, it fell through." And around that same time, we were asked to come in to apply for $1 million grant from our city. And I thought this would be a great way to get the money and just buy the building. And so we kind of started going through the process, and a lot of people were very interested in like actually, taking a building that was used for
Right.
for a strip club and turned it into a place of healing for women. And so we just kind of moved forward with that. We were invited to go participate in this specific grant, and then the problem was on the one of the terms of the grant was that it had to be used for secular use only, which means literally
No
nothing to
religion.
do with religion at
Yeah.
all. So, and we were just like, there's no way us being a ministry that we could do that. So we had to turn down that grant. But by that point, we had realized like we really do think this is our building. There's enough community engagement around it, and so we just went forward and purchased the building and are trying now just to raise the money to own it outright and have the
Right.
title. Um, so that's kind of how we ended up getting into it. And then what happened was right after we purchased it, a group of guys were having like a huge men's gathering, and they heard that we had purchased it. And so they called and said, "Hey, can we just do our men's event at the club?" And I'm sitting there thinking, like, that sounds like a great idea because it was a men's center. It was a gentleman's club. So I'm thinking it's only right if the men of our city
Mm-hmm.
decide to repent and decide to like apologize to God for using this building to exploit our women and decide to dedicate the building to God. And so that's what ended up happening is the first night that we had it, like maybe within 2 days, we ended up doing a men's worship night and had a bunch of guys come and took the stages out. And was pretty powerful, and it was really cool to see a bunch of guys that were just like dedicated to like helping our women in our community. And Father's Day was actually founded in Spokane, and
Wow.
so we love our kids, we love our daughters, we love our sisters, and we were like, we should be more about healing than exploiting.
Yeah.
And so that was really cool. And then like a month later, we did the women's night. That was even crazier, just to see so many
The
women
energy,
come
yeah.
and just worshiping God and um, praying in there, praying for the women that we were going to help. And it's just been really, really cool. You know, obviously some people have different ways of thinking about it, but I think it's a pretty cool story. And the building really does, it was the right price, the right location. It was everything that we needed.
We'll talk about divine intervention, right? Like it was under contract, it fell through. I don't know who it was under contract with, but I do remember you saying that had you not taken it over, it probably would have just been given a facelift and reopened as a strip club again.
Yeah, that's what I was hearing from city council members
Yeah.
in our city. So they were concerned about that because it had been grandfathered in. And so
Right.
I think there was a whole year where it had to be shut down and somebody could just reopen it as a club. And I don't know. I mean, I was hearing that the police were often called there all the time. And so the city just didn't want it open again.
Yep.
And so that was part of it for sure, of just going, you know what, like, we're going to have to, if we feel like this is the building and we feel like this solves all of our issues, we're just going to have to go for it. Because if we don't, the only people that are going to come and want to purchase that building are probably going to be another club.
Right.
Yeah.
So I want to get into the emotional aspect of what you do, because there's a couple stories that you've told me. And then also when we were going through the strip club, I mean, just the energy of walking through that place, it was eerie. I didn't even want to go to the freaking bathroom by myself. Like, I remember walking through that one hallway and like there was still like a light flickering, and I was like, I had to run back out and grab somebody. I'm like, I'm not going to the bathroom by myself. It is so creepy.
Yeah. What does that feel like as a woman walking through there?
I think what it kind of did for me is make me realize how lucky I am, you know? And back to what I said earlier about how like our bodies, and they're a temple, it's a sacred temple, and we need to treat it as such and present it as such. Right. And like, there are women that, were being monetized and objectified because of their bodies. Right. And so it just kind of reinforced that idea for me that like, we need to protect ourselves in that respect by not, you know, being so flashy with our bodies on social media and things like that, you know, because like this is the byproduct of that, right? It's all connected.
It's interesting. Yeah. Because from my perspective, from a guy, I'm looking at it like, well, we're telling women this is what we want. You want to make money, you want to be rich, take your clothes off. You want attention, you actually want us to care about you. Like, this is what you're going to have to do. So I'm looking through the lens of needing to train young men and men to think differently. And you know what I mean? As a guy, that's all I can really do is talk to men and be like, hey, listen, this is our part that we need to stop doing.
Yeah, we've got a lot of we've got a big challenge on our hands, because the youth of today, like, they're stepping into something that we didn't step into. Yeah. Right. I mean,
or even younger than we did.
Exactly. Yeah. And like, who knows, like maybe their parents, the wiring of their parents' brain being changed from that stimulus, who knows what that's doing to them even before they're born. Right. This is like generational trauma. This is a bigger problem than just a kid stumbling upon porn. Right. And I know for me, like, when we were kids, we didn't have access to certain things. We didn't have the internet. When we did, it was like the AIM chat. Not saying it wasn't dangerous, but now kids, I mean, it's everywhere, right? And the access and the barrier to entry is so low. And so what I love about what you're doing is, you know, you're attacking it, but we've also got this, we got to stay ahead of it too, right? You're attacking it kind of like from a prevention and sort of like rescuing people from that environment, right? But I think what I want to get into, you know, towards the end of this, before we talk about the emotional piece, is like, how can we get to like the source of where this starts, right? Yeah. How can we protect our kids? How can we protect ourselves? But going back to the emotional piece, I remember going through the strip club, and we were in a kind of this area that was really dark and cold, and somebody asked you a question and you said like, I have to bury a lot in this line of work, like, because everybody in there was just like completely shook, right? And you were so stoic in your demeanor. How have you managed your emotions so that it doesn't manifest in an unhealthy way? Because you're also very like calm and grounded, and I don't think not very many people could do what you're doing. So walk me through the emotional aspect of it and how you sort of circumvent all these things that you have to see and hear about on a continuous basis.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that I've got faith. And so the biggest thing I think all of us go through is there's certain fears that we have to overcome, right? But the main one is just the fear of death. And I think when you get to a point where you're not afraid to die for something, then you can function, right? I was watching a Band of Brothers, which is a really cool show, but it was about World War II, and they basically were talking about how they just had to come to the point that they thought they were going to die, and then they could actually perform and they could actually function.
Wow.
And I think that's a lot of what Christianity kind of talks about, is it's like you need to die to yourself, and you have to be willing to like give up your life like Christ gave up his life. And so I feel like I gave up my life at 18. I tried it my way, and I just landed on my face. And I gave up my life. And when I literally said, God, you're my Lord, like I'm going to follow you no matter what you ask me to do, even if it kills me, like I meant it. And so when you're walking into this world, there's a there's a reality of, you know what, this is not probably the safest job. And one of the things is there's other guys that are operators that are going out and rescuing and doing that. We're more of a hospital, so once the women are rescued, they come to us and get help. So there's that aspect. So it's not like we're going in kicking in doors and making people angry. We're just there to help love on the women. But there is a reality that this is, in order to make this happen and make this change, like we have to let people know what we're doing.
Yeah.
We have to actually speak to our culture and say enough's enough. And so I think that's the main part. And then secondly, I think God gives you grace. When he's called you to something, he graces you to do it. And so he's been able to just kind of grace me into it. My team is really good at not letting me know all the details. A lot of our staff have to go through counseling. That's part of the continuum care for our staff, is they need to see a counselor. They need to get help from all the stuff that they're hearing.
Yep.
But the women are really good at kind of letting me know the information I need to know without telling me like the crazy stories and how deep the trauma goes. Because it affects you,
Yeah.
But I think when you're around it a while, it becomes your reality, right? And so this is just our reality. Like, I don't know any different now. It's just, this is what we do. This is my job.
Right.
And we love these ladies, and we've seen hope, and we see the other side of it. And so I think when somebody's not around it and you walk into a situation, you're like, oh my gosh, this feels so overwhelming. We all felt like that. I felt like that when I first got going, and it was just like, it was crazy. But after you see God move and you see people's lives change so much, you just realize why you're doing it, and it just helps you get through. But I would say without a doubt, you have to be called into this.
Yes. Yeah.
And so almost everybody that is in this industry that we meet with, they all had some kind of encounter with God or something where they were like, actually feel like they were called into this work. Because if you're trying to get into this work because you want attention, or you want your friends to like you because you think that you're helping trafficking victims, or you're gonna have a rough time.
Right. And I think the term that comes to mind with our society is that ignorance is bliss. And when you're a first responder or in this line of work, you cannot be ignorant to it. Like, you have to see it head on. And it's one thing to disassociate from it when there's a degree of separation, right? It's not a family member. How do you compartmentalize knowing what you know and going home to your kids and your family and not letting those intrusive thoughts creep in?
Well, I know that the number one thing that's going to keep my kids safe is me being in their life. So the number one thing that we normally see is that most of the women that end up getting trafficked don't have a good dad.
Wow.
And so, and that's me sitting down with traffickers and me sitting down with pimps and actually interviewing them and talking to them. And they would say, like, that was one of our main questions. Tell me about your dad. And if they don't have a dad, or they have like, they're looking for attention, they don't have a good relationship with their dad, they pick up on that really quick because they're wanting somebody that is easy more, they don't necessarily want to have somebody run to their father and say, hey, this guy's doing XYZ or grooming me, or as somebody that has a good relationship with their dad. And so for me, I just know if I'm in my kids' lives and I'm there with them, the probability and chance of them getting trafficked or getting into that is not as high. And being in my daughter's life and dating her and letting her know what to look for in a man, like there's a lot you can do as a father to just make sure that your daughter understands her value and who she is as a person. And then the other part of it is, you practice shooting guns and working out and doing jujitsu.
Yeah.
And, because I don't want to be ignorant to, if I get in a situation, like I want to be able to handle myself, but at the same time, I'm not, you have to function, you have to move forward with your life, and you can't let fear just dictate everything that's going on. But we're not ignorant.
Yep.
We don't even, like, when we go to churches, our kids are with us.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even let my kids go into like the kids area unless there's two people and there's a camera and they're trained, because we've heard horrible stories of people being abused in church. And so we're not ignorant to it. We don't let our kids stay the night at people's houses. It's not so much that we might not trust the people that the kids are going to stay, but we don't know who their uncle is or who their aunt is, or who their crazy cousin is. Like, it's just safer for us to be able to make sure our kids are safe. And as our kids get older, they're going to hate me for it. But ultimately, my job is to make sure they're safe. And I remember hearing a story. This girl, her dad would just say, "Hey, when you're 18, like, you can do what you want, but until then, like, my job is to keep you safe." And she was just so angry and fight him all the time. Like, I want to go stay at my friend's house. I want to go stay at my friend's house. So when she turned 18, what do you think she did? First thing she does, I'm going to go do a night out with the girls and go do a sleepover. And she's sitting with the girls, and the girls are telling them, well, I can't believe that you've never done a sleepover. And then one by one, each of the girls starts telling her their trauma and the amount of abuse they've been through, and they're crying.
Wow.
And they're just saying, I wish my dad would have actually kept me safe. And that girl ended up calling her dad that night, crying and just saying, hey, I didn't understand. Thank you so much for keeping me safe. And
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing, is like, we just, as a father, my job is really to keep my kids safe. And I take that extremely seriously. And so
Yeah.
I have to even manage my life where I'm not, giving up my family for ministry. And I have to have a good, well-balanced, situation, because being a father is of the most importance and the main thing that I think as men we can do to make sure our kids are safe.
Yeah.
So
we need men to be men.
Yeah.
And I know for me, my dad was emotionally absent. I mean, he was there at all my games and everything like that, but he wasn't teaching me how to be, how to assert myself or how to be observant. And it took me a while to.
Do you even know if he knew how to do that though?
He didn't.
That's what's hard.
Yeah.
Is like, I'm having to learn how to even tell my wife how I feel.
Yep.
It's just not natural. Like, you're just, as a guy, you're just taught, like, dude, you have like three emotions, you
Right.
know, and you just don't even half the time know how to even communicate how you feel. And I think that's something that as men we just have to get better at, because I'm sure your dad loved you and cared for you, but a lot of it's probably just how he was raised too, right?
For sure. He did the best with what he knew how to do. But yeah, we do need men to step up and be men and assert themselves in a masculine way, right? And I don't think we have enough of that. So I love what you stand for, because we need more people like you.
Now you're being told, like, if I'm going to be masculine, like, it's toxic.
Yep.
That's hard when you're a young guy and you're trying to, like, figure out who you are and what you're supposed to be as a man. And then you start going to church. You want to follow God, or you want to be a better person. And the more you get closer to the Lord, the more you feel like you want to protect and provide for your family. And then culture's telling you you're sexist if you're having these thoughts. And you know what I mean? Like, it's a confusing time to be a dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as a woman, when men aren't being men and men aren't exercising their masculinity in a healthy way, it confuses us as to what masculinity is. So we may gravitate towards unhealthy sources of it, right? And that's how people end up in these situations with men that are grooming them and basically trapping them through love, and then pushing them into these these spaces. So okay, so let's get into Like, what's next for you? I know we've got the strip club. You've got plans for that.
Yeah.
What do you see though, like in your 5-10 year vision, right?
Ooh, I love these questions. This is my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
I love, like, I'm definitely a visionary. So it really just depends on funding, and so I'm trying to figure out how to do all that, trying to get our name out there. At first, I've seen a lot of organizations just focus solely on getting their name out there, but they don't have an engine to the car. Like, they're getting their name out there. A lot of people know who they are, but they have no staff. They have no ability to actually help somebody if they get out of a trafficking situation. And so for the longest time, we've really been building our team, and we have a really good team and a really good foundation. So now I'm at a point where I feel very, very confident to go on podcasts and start sharing about who we are and what we're doing. So if women need help, we actually can offer them the help that we say we're going to give them. So right now, we just want to keep doing what we're doing with the stabilization and emergency care. But the next thing we want to do is we really want to get that building, and then we want to remodel it. We want to be able to start offering outpatient. We want to then open more of an emergency center. So for that first 72 hours to a week, they'll actually go to the emergency center. That's where they'll help really get clean. And then they'll move into our safe house. And then we want to offer a 90-day program, which would be more like a recovery program. And then before we send them out to other organizations, then we would love to reopen up our long-term program for other cities to send their women to us. Or if they're safe, they would just go through our recovery program into our restoration program. And then finally, they'd end up in our transitional housing. And that would be our dream, right?
Yeah.
Is to be able to have, and honestly, after we do the anti-trafficking thing, we're going to open up like a satellite campus in Coeur d'Alene, because what we really need is just advocacy and training over there. And if somebody is an advocate, they can go meet with somebody, and then if they need more inpatient, they just bring them over to our facilities. But that way we would really have a really good handle on what we're doing, having advocacy, having case management, having people there for them, having that inpatient care, helping them get through the detox. If they need medical detox, somebody can go sit with them at the hospital. And we're not going to do medical detox, but
right.
Just trying to help them get clean and get them stable. But then once they're stable, then they almost need to be like, go through a whole restoration program of just relearning, like, who's a safe person, what's my identity, what am I good at, how can I make a living in another way. Like, it takes time to reprocess and
this is a heavy lift. I mean, you think about anybody with basic childhood trauma, right? That can affect them their entire lives. This is a whole other ballgame.
Most of them do have that. So if you have childhood trauma, then you have sexual trauma, and then you have drug addiction and alcoholism. Like, it's like mixing all of that into one person. And a lot of disassociation, a lot of borderline personality disorder, lots of different things like that come with all the trauma that they went through.
So one of the questions I wanted to ask, kind of back to this like false sense of security that we have, like, what can we do, like, independent of helping captives, just for ourselves? What can we do to protect ourselves? And I'm not just talking about women, I'm talking about men and also our kids. Like, what are some things that you suggest we just kind of do to be on higher alert around these things?
Well, I think the number one thing, it's going to sound so like cliche, but you have got to be trained. Like, you just have to understand what trafficking is and signs to look for, because then the more you're trained on it, the more you'll see it. And I think a lot of times what happens is people, have you ever been in a situation where something feels off and you don't understand why, and then years later you hear somebody tell you their story, you go, oh my gosh, like, that's why. I had no idea you were being molested. I had no idea you were going through that kind of hell, but something felt weird about it. Well, when you're trained and you understand that this is a real thing that people do, then your eyes are a little bit more open to it. And so that's the best thing you can do, is just to train yourself on what trafficking is and what they do. And so that you can, if you see something that seems off, you can look into it. You're willing to call the police. You're willing to risk it and say, hey, I see something, or something's not right with my kid. Like, she was doing really, really good in school, and now all of a sudden she's sneaking out. She's partying all the time. Like, even if she's not being trafficked, there's some form of trauma has happened. Her whole personality shifted, right? it's just being aware of what those things are so that you can make sure that your kid doesn't end up in a situation where she is being trafficked, or somebody that you deeply love and care for is being trafficked. And then obviously just not being dumb and not being naive with, just letting young girls just walk the street at night and, doing stuff like that. I mean, there's an aspect to just making sure your kids are safe. But that would be the biggest thing, I think, is just to be honestly, trained and go through some trainings and just understand what trafficking is and how they're trafficking people. And when you learn, here's how it works, or here's how they groom your kids online, like, you need to get the app called Bark. Every parent should have the app called Bark if your kids have cell phones. Also, it's totally fine to tell your kids they don't get a smartphone until they're adults. Like, you think you're trying to keep your, like, what you're doing by giving your kid a smartphone is you're just giving, you think you're giving their kid access to the world, but you're giving the world access to your kid. And we didn't have that. We didn't just have, porn a click away and people trying to, get our attention and trying to get us to send pictures to them and all this different stuff all the time. I mean, I kind of did toward the end of my high school, like senior year, we kind of had phones and you could do some of that stuff, but it wasn't like it is today. And Bark will allow you to know where your kids are at, the location they're at, who they're talking to on their apps. You need to know who your kid's talking to online, because almost 85% of trafficking, grooming happens online now. And it's because, think about it, they're just going through Instagram, Snapchat, whatever. They're just looking for girls that are, seductively dressed and that are already kind of wanting that attention for their body. And then they're just hitting them up like, hey, you know what I mean? Like, it sounds cliche, but I mean, that's really what it is. And even for me, like when I was in high school, you just go through Facebook or MySpace back then and you try and find girls that you thought like, hey, she looks like she might be easy to hook up with.
Exactly.
Like, you do that in your head. That's just what they're doing.
And then, okay, so you've secured the strip club, but there's still funds that are needed to actually renovate it, turn it into a help center, and own it outright. And then you've got your secondary headquarters that you want to start in Idaho, because I think you said like 30% of your victims come from there, right?
Yeah, we do get a lot. We get a ton from North Idaho. And so we definitely would love to have an office over there just for in case when somebody gets a call or they need an advocate, we can just be there. So that's kind of our big 2-step process.
In the short term. So how can we help? How can we help as a community, as an individual?
The biggest thing for us is we want to have hired, trained staff. So a lot of people will go, hey, I want to volunteer, but it's a little challenging because it's a little overwhelming for women to come out and then just see a bunch of different types of different volunteers coming in. It's a lot safer. It feels safe for them to have like the same staff they see every day that are trained. So we do have some volunteer opportunities, but most of our volunteers, they don't ever want to leave or they don't want to quit. And so we have people go through four of our trainings, and then they're kind of in a in a system. And then when we need a volunteer, then we'll shoot that out to those people that have gone through the training and they'll have an interview. But for the most part, what we really need is people just to share what we're doing and try and help raise the money to make this happen. So we are about $650,000 away from just owning the building outright. And then we're going to be sending out grants. We've got some opportunities with Vista and stuff where they're going to help with like HVAC and windows and stuff like that. But we just really want to own the building outright and have the title in hand, because then we don't have a mortgage. We don't have we're not paying any like administrative costs for our office. It really helps our budget a lot. It helps us get into the next realm for grants because our asset to liability ratio changes a lot when you actually own a building like that size outright. So that's what we're really trying to do right now. We're just trying to own it outright, and then after that we'll have phases where we'll gut it, and then we'll kind of over time just kind of remodel it into what we need it to be. But thank God we're in a position where you can still help the women that we're helping even without the building, right? So that's awesome, because we're still able to help. We've helped 50 women this year, right? So we're still able to help with the facilities that we do have. But when we get that building, it's just going to help us exponentially grow. And so what's nice about that is that all the money that does go into the capital campaign literally goes into the capital campaign. Like we can just put 100% of that money to go toward that building.
So we can support through helpingcaptives.com, correct?
Yeah, helpingcaptives.org.
Helpingcaptives.org.
I think we own both of them, but it takes you to helpingcaptives.org.
Okay, yeah. I'll tag all those, and then I really appreciate the bark thing, and then also I know you got some resources on the website of how we can protect ourselves, look out for signs, and so make sure to link those for our audience as well. Is there anything else you want to plug in the meantime?
I don't know. I just now got an Instagram, so I'm trying to get in the game, because for a long time I just was like, I'm going to stay hidden and I want to learn. And now I'm like, okay, I think it's time for us to kind of get our name out there. So you can follow me on Instagram. I've got this really cool opportunity with a guy that owns an app called Manect. And so if you want to download the app called Manect, you can shoot me a question or talk to me directly, and I'll follow up with you 100% of the time. I'll answer your questions. It's only $10 to communicate, to try and talk with me. And then that money just goes directly into helping us fund the strip club remodel. So it's like a $10 donation basically to communicate. But what's cool is that every time I do have a communication with somebody, I get a point. And if I get enough points, then it gets me into a room with some very wealthy people to kind of share what our vision is. So that's kind of what I've been doing.
Tell us about the shout out that you recently got on a pretty major podcast.
Yeah. So PBD, Patrick Bet-David's the guy that actually owns the app, and he loves what we're doing. And so he did a little shout out for us on the podcast, but he wants to do a bigger shout out. And then potentially, if I can get enough next, he would love for me to come out and actually share with his audience at his conference about what we're doing. So that's why I'm kind of pushing that right now.
And that's what moves the needle. Like a lot of a little equals a lot, right? And the more people we can, inform about this, like $10 here, $10 there, it all adds up.
Yeah.
And the best part about what you're doing is like, we can follow the paper trail and we can see the tangible impact of your efforts, right?
Yeah.
Just by looking at the number, that many more victims that we're able to help through your efforts, right?
Yeah.
Compared to how many victims you helped in the absence of some of these, facilities and resources that you have, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the best thing about what you're doing is people aren't just writing a check and sending it off to a major organization, right? And it's starting right here in our communities, which is, we have something so special here that we need to preserve. Yeah. And so I just love what you're doing, and I appreciate you so much. I'm lucky to call you one of my friends. And with that,
dude, we talked about God and you didn't cuss.
I know. I didn't.
Go, girl. I don't think you did. I think you killed it. I think I might have my mom be able to watch the podcast.